There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can light up your funnels. Let's go. This is Performance Marketing Insiders. I'm Chris Mechanic. Join me as we go deep into the secrets of the world's elite marketing minds. Performance Marketing Insiders is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Performance Marketing Insiders. I'm your man, Chris Mechanic. Really excited for today's guest. Today's guest is a hardware engineer turned product marketer. He's done long stints at both NVIDIA and Twilio, which are two companies that I have just a ton of respect for. They are some of the best companies in the game. I've owned them myself for many years, their stocks. Not only that, but he's now VP marketing at Snorkel AI. So he's very much like on the forefront of, everything happening in AI. So the timing couldn't possibly be better. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Devang Sachdev.
Hey, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So excited to be speaking with you today. And you know how we roll here at Performance Marketing Insiders. We want the secrets. So why don't you just lay it on us right now? Like, tell us one of your biggest secrets to success in marketing specifically.
Absolutely. And I've enjoyed hearing secrets from other presenters you've had. So here's mine, okay? And this is going to be shocking. So get ready for it. So my secret, I would say that this is something that has been a secret for me being successful lately. I wouldn't say throughout my career, but lately it's this little thing that nobody's heard about called ChatGPT. So I just kid, because everybody, including people who live under the rock, have heard about ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I think what sometimes feels like a secret is how do you put it to use for marketing and how do you make the best out of it?
That's right.
I think there's a lot there, and I would love to share some of my ways of using it that I've learned from the internet, that I've learned by just trial and error. And then I'm more than happy to share some of the other tools that I use that are related to ChatGPT or related to what we now call foundation models for marketing.
Let's do it. I love it. I think we'll be safe to skip like the what is ChatGPT. I think, pretty much anybody listening knows what it is, but I'd love to hear about some of the ways that you're using it. And I'll tell you about some of the things we're doing with it too. Yeah,
that would be fantastic. So here are 4 or 5 ways that I've been using it. And, I would say that me saying ChatGPT is a little bit catch-all. I mean, some of these things I use, for some of these things, I also use other tools, other applications.
Yeah.
But generally, we'll just use the term ChatGPT as a way to say, what are you using generative AI for?
Right.
Specifically when it comes to marketing. So just off the bat, one of the key things that marketers do often is market research. You want to understand what's the market about, who are your customers or prospects, and particularly who are your competitors. And a big job for marketing is about positioning against that market or positioning in that market. Mm-hmm. So I have found ChatGPT, especially GPT-4, which just got released 2-3 days ago, and it's actually widely divergent in the performance that it delivers compared to ChatGPT, which is based on GPT 3.5. The way I use it for market research is I ask very simple questions as to who are the key players in a particular domain. And then I would refine it based on, of course, my my knowledge of the field. And then I would ask specific questions as to go visit the website and help me understand how are they positioning themselves, what is their lead, and then how are they differentiating themselves. Give me top 5 differentiators. But I also ask another question, which is actually oftentimes more insightful, which is what are their shortcomings? I think this can really help you identify what are white gaps in the market. And then what I do is I take the same and I do a little bit of mystery shopping. So I ask ChatGPT to do the same on my website. This way, I know that one, is my messaging consistent? And, it's a good way of using ChatGPT as a mirror to say, I know nothing about my company, my website, my product. And if someone comes to my website and they consume all this stuff, what is a nominal takeaway from all of this through
Oh,
the lens of
cool.
ChatGPT, right?
So tell us a specific prompt. Well, let me just clarify first. So you're going to ChatGPT and you're taking competitor A and you're saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, tell me what competitor A's top five differentiators are."
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah, yeah. Like for
is that the
example,
exact prompt you used?
yeah, they're very simple prompts. They don't need to have any kind of fancy prompt engineering, as it's called, that you are an expert in this and that. I just go very simple and I say, who are the top five competitors in space X, right? Space X meaning your domain. And
Hmm.
then I try to keep things limited to five because and usually ChatGPT responses are anywhere between 5, 7, and 10.
Yeah,
I like to think in the rules of threes and fives. So I'm just projecting my own thinking on top of ChatGPT, which makes me feel a little bit more in control.
yeah.
Uh, I'm sure that we all are feeling less and less of it as all these things are coming around us. But anyways, I asked that prompt and then I drilled down. And specifically starting with that prompt is also a good way of building trust that, hey,
Hmm.
does this tool, does this application understand my domain? And I have been surprised, not anymore, that how much Chat GPT, but particularly GPT-4, develops and delivers a contextual awareness of the space. And the more prompts you ask, the more contextually relevant responses it starts creating. So
Hmm.
that's the starting point. And then once I have five competitors or feel like I have the right five competitors, then I start drilling down. Tell me more about this company. What do they do? And it creates
Hmm.
anywhere between 1 paragraph and 3 paragraph summary.
Yeah.
And then I talk about, okay, tell me now what are their top five differentiators.
Hmm.
And then I ask the same question of another competitor, and I try to filter out, are there any common, denominators in that differentiator that are just generic? Like, for example, in my domain, I see interoperability as a differentiator that a lot of companies use. But the
Hmm.
fact is that if I ask the same question about one competitor versus another competitor, ChatGPT responds with the exact same response for both competitors, right? Which tells
Hmm.
me that it has a signal around interoperability as a differentiator, and it's kind of making up the rest of the stuff in
Hmm.
context with that space and that domain. But I would probably discount that as a differentiator for the most part. But certainly I would not include it in my white space, because if ChatGPT is already talking about it as a differentiator for two or three of my competitors, that is not something that
Right.
is so highly valuable that I need to also double down into.
Right. Or it's not that unique, at
Or
least.
it's not that unique. That's true.
Cool. Well, that's really interesting because I've heard about people using ChatGPT for market research, but I've never heard of an example that specific. And I think what you started saying this, but then turning that lens back on your own company and asking the same questions for your own company to see just like how congruent is your message across the site? Can a robot go there and like really come back with having heard that message that you want them to hear? So that's a really cool technique.
Yeah, I used to do some of this quite. I mean, I still do this quite frequently, both in interview settings or in just familiarity setting or learning settings, is mystery shopping, right? So when I decide to join a new company, I will go mystery shopping them throughout their marketing and their sales funnel till however far I can get to. And
Hmm.
then from time to time, if we are adopting something new or on our front end, specifically around the website, then I will go through that path yet again. So we just added a chat capability to our website, and I honestly didn't even do it as a mystery shopping. I just showed up on chat, and this chat is powered by our BDR team.
Hmm.
So I showed up on chat and I said, hey, I want to learn more about your product just to see what the experience is now that this chat is live.
Hmm.
And one of our BDRs, and we are a small team, so everybody knows each other, but our BDR couldn't tell that it was me. And this BDR is really good at putting out social posts about the company. So I was complimenting him. I was saying that, are you the most prolific social marketer at Snorkel? And he freaked out a little bit. He's like, why is this prospect who's just visiting our site kind of telling me all this stuff? And we had
Hmm.
a laugh about it once he discovered that it was me. But yeah, I think mystery shopping is definitely a very. I mean, I believe that it's an important and a good way of understanding how your marketing is sticking,
And
both
you use
operationally and
ChatGPT somehow with mystery shopping, or that's just
well,
like a technique that you use?
I would say mystery shopping in this context is the fact that ChatGPT is reading your website and is giving you some insights about what it learned.
I got you. I got
Yeah.
you. I'm a huge fan of mystery shopping too. I often do it with clients. I'll fill out their web form and basically see, how long it'll take them to call me back, or if they
That's right.
call me back, or what they say when they call me back.
Yeah.
So that's really
Yeah.
coul. Well,
Yeah.
hey, tell me about, because you seem to be pretty well versed in the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4, which I personally am not. And so it's very timely. Can you tell us what you know about the major differences between the two?
Yeah. So my specifics might be a little bit off, but GPT-3 was released, I believe, sometime in 2020.
November, I think.
Yeah. 2021, 2022. No, 20, sorry, like I said, my dates are mixed up. I think it was released sometime in 2021. And then in 2022, last year, we had November when ChatGPT came out, which is based on GPT 3.5, which is an augmentation on GPT 3. But GPT-3 is, one of the things about GPT-3 is that it's trained on data that is pre-2021, and it is a 175 billion parameter model. The most things that GPT-3 does is it focuses on text-based input, right? That's the primary mode or data modality that it works with. And even within that, it's unstructured text that you paste whatever text, doesn't matter the formatting, you just paste it in and let ChatGPT or GPT make sense of it. The reality is that there are other data modalities. There are more structured data modalities where you have columnar information or you have form-based information that have relationships, spatial relationships. And that's something that GPT-3 wasn't taking into account. And there are many applications that you could develop if you had that level of understanding.
Like a spreadsheet almost. Like you couldn't really upload a spreadsheet to GPT-3.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that there is a blurry line between unstructured, which is just plain text, and semi-structured, which is some sort of spatial organization or fully structured text. So it's not as if ChatGPT can't do anything; it just doesn't understand that very deeply yet. The other data modality that it didn't fully have a deep knowledge about was images.
Right.
So those are some of the things that are improving in GPT-4. So with GPT-4, one of the demos that we've seen is Greg Bachman, who's one of their co-founders. He took a photo of a paper that he had written a front end of a UI of a website on, and he just took a photo of it, hand sketched, and ChatGPT or GPT-4 turned it into an actual website with code underneath it. So
wow.
that's what we call cross-modal, which is it's understanding the image, it's understanding what is in the image, and then it's generating things that are related to the task, whether it's text or images. And then the other thing that's unique is it's trained or different. It's trained on more recent, much more pervasive data. So it has a lot more contextual information about what's happening in the world. But the training is still, a point in time. It's not that it's, always current.
Right.
There's a lot of retraining that happens to keep it current, but it's always a snapshot in time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know that the previous data set ended in 2021, but the new training set is up to 2023 or 2022.
I would imagine it would be sometime in the middle of 2022 because it does take quite a bit of time to go from just data set to a production version of these models. Now, that said, all the interactions that you and I don't know how many millions of us have been having with ChatGPT is used as its training data as well. So that also is continuously fed into it to improve it on the edges.
Well, Devang, I promised you that this would be like 45 minutes, but I think we're going to go like an hour and a half here, man, because I could just go all day on ChatGPT.
And I'll tell you, I've just started with one of my ChatGPT secrets. I have 4 or 5 others. So, through this conversation, maybe I'll pepper another few.
Yeah, lay them on me though. What's number 2?
So I know with ChatGPT or GPT in general, there's a lot of there's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of also fear that if all my content is created now by these bots, what is real and what's not, right? And at the end of the day, bottom line, how does this affect my SEO? because it can be very powerful or it can be detrimental depending upon what the gods at Google and Bing decide, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's also user preference based. So however we decide that we love consuming this content or we don't enjoy consuming content, or can we even tell the difference, which I think is a lot of interest in people learning that this content has been generated by an automated system rather than a full human. But the way
Yeah.
I see it is, it doesn't matter um, where the content is generated. Even in the earlier context that I talked about with market research, um, using ChatGPT, using, as they're called, foundation models, is a starting point. There's always a human involved, and I think that's the best way to think about this technology too. It's an assistant, and you are going to take its input, but you're going to apply your own knowledge, skills and decisions to make sure that whatever you're putting out is worthwhile. So here are a couple
Yeah.
of ways that I use it for SEO. So similar to market research, I do keyword research, but
Hmm.
I specifically ask for the keywords to be broken down by search quality. So medium, high, medium, and low. And this
Hmm.
helps me understand as to what are the search terms that I could really capitalize on and which are the ones that are long tail.
Mm.
And that's still an intentional choice. You can go after low quality, which is low search volume, but they are long tail ones. And if they are very relevant or you have a unique offer in the long tail side of the keywords, then might as well create content for it. So I go
Hmm.
a couple of steps further. One of the things that Google has been doing lately is, whenever you carry out a search, it also starts listing out FAQ related to that search keyword.
Yeah.
And one of the SEO tricks is, it's not even a trick anymore, but one of the people that do with SEO is just look at that list of questions, and then they write articles based on each of those questions, or at least create an FAQ that addresses each of those questions.
Yep.
So one thing that I do is I will take my own product page or my own company page, I'll paste it into ChatGPT, and I'll ask ChatGPT to create an FAQ and responses based on that content. And actually, it
Hmm.
does a pretty good job. And it's based on my own content with a little bit more external information, and it gives
Hmm.
me in a format that is almost readily usable with a little bit of inspection.
Ah,
So,
that's smart.
so that's a really good
So
one.
how do you structure that prompt? Is that all just one prompt? Is it
Yeah,
like, hey, using the copy below or the content below, create an article addressing these questions, and you just paste in like the FAQs that show on the Google?
I go even more simpler. I just say create FAQs and responses for this content, and I just paste the content in.
Oh, I
Literally
see.
copied everything from my web page or blog post or company page, put it in, and it starts generating anywhere between 5 and 10 questions that are
Interesting.
actually pretty spot on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
And
that's really awesome. So you don't actually look at the specific FAQs that Google's serving on that SERP. You just ask it to create like FAQ style content.
That's right. And you can do the other way too. Usually you would want to look at what is Google delivered and then say, okay, also give me a response for this particular question. I think that's fair game too. But this just
Hmm.
gives me a head start at saying, if I had to write a universe of FAQs, what would I go write about? Last
Yeah.
night, like I was telling you earlier, that I had a little bit of a late evening working session, and I think I produced 32 FAQs across a few different product areas that I wanted to put more information out about. So
Yeah.
it's quite efficient that ways. I also believe that marketing domains or marketing for different areas can vary in terms of how technical or not technical your content is going to be. I think the more technical the products get, the harder time ChatGPT is going to have, because that's a very limited set of data that it has learned. So that's where I would say that when you ask it to go beyond just FAQs or go beyond summarization of content that you've created and try to create net new content, in that place, in that scenario, you want to at least start with one-on-one content and see if ChatGPT is starting to develop some basis in your domain. So, for
Hmm.
example, for my domain, which is related to what we call data-centric AI, that is powered with programmatic labeling, It is quite technical, and it's very research based. It is starting to become a much more known concept, even within the
Hmm.
data science community now. But I wouldn't expect ChatGPT to become an expert overnight. So what I do is I ask it to create a lot more one-on-one content based on the FAQs that I've created. So if FAQ is about, tell me about a particular technique that your product is doing, now I'll say, okay, write me a 1,200 word blog post with this outline, and then I'll go from there.
Hmm. Interesting. So so once you get that content, what are you doing with it? Are you putting it, you're just, well, obviously you're reading it and you'll revise it,
Yeah.
or adjust it, but then you include it on your product pages, or you just post it like as a net new page?
I usually post it as blogs, so that's my
Hmm.
long tail deep dive content. Um, but as at the end of the day, it is being more surgical with the questions that you're asking and the content that you're asking to create. I think if you're going to remain high level, it's going to create high level content that may come across as generic.
Yeah.
But the more you start using it as an assistant, so if you say that, hey, write me um, something basic about data labeling, and then you go from there to saying, what are the different techniques? How is this technique different than that technique? And I think that kind of follows the pattern of curiosity that a prospect may have who's coming to your website, right?
Hmm.
So if you the more you start putting yourself in the mind of your prospect and start using ChatGPT as a way of uh, inquiry, the better responses you'll start getting, and the more readily available that content will be to put to use in long form or even short form pages.
Yeah. And I think in GPT-4, the input field is larger, right? So like you
Yeah,
can, because it used to be limited to like 3,000 or so
20
characters.
2,500 characters. Yeah, the what I've heard about GPT-4 is that the input and output fields are now what is 25,000 characters or
Hmm.
tokens as they call them. But yeah, it's pretty it's much larger now.
Yeah. And that I think opens up, because we had been working here internally on a method to take long form content, because we have a lot of B2B clients, and a
Mm,
lot of them have webinars or podcasts or even like lengthy white papers. Like they have a lot of long form content. So we'd started using basically a workaround to like chunk it, summarize it, and like put it all together so that to repurpose long form pieces into blog posts.
yeah.
Um, and we were pretty excited about that. And we had several of our clients were really excited about it because it just gives a lot more. Like, you could take now one long form piece of content and create theoretically like half a dozen blog posts from it.
Yep.
Um, but that's huge that now the input limit is much larger. So you like we could take a transcript of this podcast probably and use it as the base or as the training data or whatever to create all sorts of stuff, to create all the LinkedIn posts, to create the emails that are going to be sent out around it, to create even blog posts.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I would, more technically call it just input, right? Because to train ChatGPT would be, or even refine ChatGPT or fine tune ChatGPT, we would require a different mechanism. But giving it input and having it learn from that input to develop an output, I think that's certainly something that is core to how ChatGPT should be used. A couple of
Yeah.
other ways, what you just said around taking existing content, and this content can be um, anything. I have done product reviews that I've posted in because we run surveys from time to time. I've done performance reviews as I collect 360 performance from my peers and try to understand a collection of what is the synthesis of all the information that I've received. I've summarized tweets, I've summarized emails. I think I'm going to start using it for my tax advice to some degree, where
Yeah.
if there is a complicated question, I'm going to ask that, what is the scenario that I can learn more about, because tax articles are rather long and sometimes the details are embedded in a specific example. So that was something that they talked about with GPT-4 announcement too. But one thing I really enjoy, and maybe you might have used this too, is to take our meeting notes or this Zoom call transcript and then turn it into key takeaways, next steps, and actions to
Yeah.
help you build the agenda for our next chat, right? And that can be very important, very useful in a sales context. That can be very useful in a project management context. The one
Mm-hmm.
word of caution that I'll say is if you don't want to put anything in public that shouldn't be in public, then try using ChatGPT through the API, because that ways you could keep your data secure. But if you're going to use the public interface, then expect it to take the data that you're giving it, maybe get trained with it at some point, and possibly spit it out in a different context where you may not want it to be released. So
Yeah.
just a word of caution on that.
Yeah. I've never tried it myself, but I heard that you can ask it questions like, "Hey, give me Devang Sachdev's email address at Snorkel."
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to try it because I haven't done it. Now, I would say that certainly as any good marketer, you would want to have consent before putting people on your mailing list.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that it can at least develop some sort of heuristics to understand. I've seen emails, especially from a large company, that I've seen emails that are very similarly framed, first name, last name at whatever.com.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be hard for it to produce things like that. What I found really interesting is understanding how people write.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask ChatGPT for a response, let's say you said, "Hey, summarize this podcast," right? And you and I have this conversation, so we know um, the details and the depths of this conversation. But if we said, "Summarize this podcast in the words of Malcolm
Gladwell
Gladwell," that's right, or Adam Grant, right? They
or
have
Joe Rogan.
or Joe, that's right, or Joe Rogan. So we've already seen such style-based approaches applied to image stuff with DALL-E or Midjourney, but you
Yeah.
can totally apply it to text too, and it does create quite divergent. And for me, who's now becoming a more and more of a student of language, when I read those comparative summaries, then I'm like, oh, I see how Malcolm Gladwell is thinking, and which is why it's shaping the way that he talks.
Yeah.
And if I want to talk like Obama, then I better start using some of this word phrasing.
Yeah.
I'm failing at it terribly, but that's sort of my bucket list maybe one day.
Yeah. Well, I've done that as well. Like if you say, "Hey, create a LinkedIn post based on this input." Thank you for correcting my language there. Based on this input, it'll come back with something. Then I like to say, make the sentences shorter, use bulleted list, make it
Yeah,
sound like or put it in the voice of Joe Rogan, like those
right,
three things as the follow up, and it'll rewrite it
right.
and do a pretty good job.
Yeah, just pulling that thread a little bit. I've started using ChatGPT to read books. And I'll tell you how. Most of the popular books, especially in sort of your business, finance, marketing domain, they are widely available, and especially with GPT-4, GPT-4 understands them to a good degree. So what I'll start with is, just tell me, what is this book about? Quick summary. Then
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, what are all the different chapters, and give me one-line summary for each chapter. And then
Mm.
I'll start digging into the chapters where I'll be like, okay, tell me a little bit more about this particular chapter. So one of the books that I was reading with ChatGPT was called The Power of Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've heard
Mm-hmm.
about that book.
Yeah.
And it has, very clear organization of its chapters. It has like different framework, and each chapter has the same framework based on atomic habits. So then I would go into each chapter and I would be like, okay, tell me, a 3-paragraph summary, expound upon it based on this particular chapter. And funny thing, I ended up reading the book after I went through this whole process with ChatGPT, because it did pique my interest and I wanted to get some more color. But if it was something that was just, I want a quick takeaway, I could have very well stopped there and had ChatGPT made me a little bit more smarter, at least for the day.
Interesting. That's really cool. I'm gonna try that for sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
And Chris, you mentioned that you have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yep.
I'm sure that you're you're stretching your imagination when it comes to keeping up with the creativity of your little ones.
Yeah.
Maybe every evening, at least I do, when my 4-year-old is trying to go to bed and asks me, "Tell me a pretend story."
Uh,
So I pull out my good friend ChatGPT and I ask my son, who's 4-year-old as well, that okay, tell me two characters, one human and one non-human, and then tell me where did they meet and tell me what mission are they on, and then we create stories with ChatGPT. I
yeah.
take the text that is produced by ChatGPT and put it into a text-to-speech application. There are many on the internet now, and it just reads out in different accents if you wanted it to. So that's
That's
kind of cool. That's
cool.
one of the activities that we like doing from time to time in the evenings, and
Yeah.
it's at least taken off a little bit of load off of my less creative brain cells.
That's awesome, dude. I've never ever thought of doing that in a million years, but yeah, I have to make up stories daily. But no, I'm gonna try that too. That's a really good one, man. Well, hey, I'm cognizant of time. We could keep going. I want to talk about Snorkel a little bit. And I have one other question for you, and maybe the two things will collide. But like I know that like what we're talking about is using ChatGPT basically just for your daily, your day-to-day job. There's a lot of organizations that are using GPT or otherwise using AI like in larger, more impactful ways. One thought that I've had, we have some clients that, they're very large. They get a ton of data. They have live chat on their site, for instance, and they, generate hundreds, if not thousands of conversations a day. And they have certain chat agents that are much better than others in terms of like, whatever, booking the appointment or setting the deal or whatever. So I'm thinking that's pretty structured data. Like we have the chat transcripts. We could see who the rep is. We can, it says you versus the client, whatever. Like it's like semi-structured at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking there must be a way to take all this data to input it, or I don't know if it's an input at that point or otherwise a train, but basically to take the language that your best reps use, thousands of interactions, say,
Yeah.
and somehow ingest it into this machine so that you could have your own version of ChatGPT running as a chatbot on your website, but trained to be like your best salesperson, like your
Yeah.
best BDR.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think
this
I think that's a very doable use case. Let me take a small, tiny step back, right? Because I think when it comes to enterprise use of ChatGPT or foundation models, as we call them, right? Um, we're seeing a little bit of how do I call exploration still happening, and it's necessary because all of these things are very new. And
mhm,
as you can understand, the world of AI is not new. It's been around for at least 2-3 decades, even whether
yeah,
we call it AI or not, right? All of this is just based on data and statistics. And honestly, wherever we are right now and where we are headed, it's going to come down to data. It's going to be all about the data, right? And models are going to continue getting more and more sophisticated. But what is going to be necessary to go from a model, which I would call the first mile, to the end application, which is what you need. In your case, you're talking about this customized, very bespoke conversational application. The last mile is going to be the data that is going to be used to adapt your first mile, which are the models, right?
mhm,
So now, if you think about an enterprise setting, one, you have a lot of data that is very unique to you, and more that data is what is going to become your key differentiator. Even if you are the same company operating the same products, the data that you have could be very unique compared to your competitors.
mhm,
So that's one. And second, that data is most likely a private data, meaning the risk of having that data be available outside your organization is pretty high for whatever reason, compliance reasons, competitive reasons, security reasons. So between those two things, you certainly want an infrastructure that allows you to use these technologies within your own walled garden, if you want to say, within your own infrastructure.
mhm,
And some of these technologies are going to be easier to use. So for example, GPT-4 is a huge model, and to have this within your own infrastructure would be a huge amount of cost, right? But there are other ways in which you may not need a very huge model. I mean, if you are trying to build a conversational AI application like you described, maybe you take what ChatGPT or GPT-4 knows as knowledge, but then use it to create a smaller model that is much more easier to deploy on your system, that is even more accurate because now it has been trained using your own data and your own task goals, right? In your case, your task goal is learn from this particular agent and then create automated responses in similar scenarios, right? So that is the part that is what I would call the last mile is starting to become a bigger barrier for most organizations. And the tasks itself are still in what I call exploratory stage. So let's say even if you created this application, what you would have to think about is how are you going to monitor that in production, this application is going to continue producing results like your best agent, right? Because even outside of this world of foundation models or chat GPT, there is a known concept called drift, which is that constantly your data is changing and your model's performance can degrade eventually as it sees more data. So you have to constantly keep retraining it, which requires what we call an infrastructure of monitoring. I am constantly monitoring how my AI is doing, and is it within the bounds of my accuracy limits? Now, the last point I'll make over here is that in most enterprise settings, and the way that AI has been used so far, it's been used for automation, right? You would think about this as fraud detection in banks, right? You would think about this as triaging patient notes to determine if they have some specific conditions that a doctor should be aware and keep in mind as they are interacting with this patient. It could be about analyzing network traffic and determining what corrective actions need to be taken to avoid a hack or avoid traffic congestion. But in all of these situations, the need for accuracy is extremely high, right? Sometimes even as high as 99.999%. And it's important that accuracy stays at that point throughout the course that the model is in production.
Yeah.
So for those reasons, these generative technologies, they need to be, first of all, they need to be adapted to your own data for them to become accurate. Second, there needs to be infrastructure that allows you to understand that the accuracy is going to be what I expect it to be. And third, the infrastructure needs to be accommodating for some of these large models to be turned into more deployment models that are easy for an enterprise to deploy. Otherwise, it's the ROI is going to be very hard to claim. Because each of the tasks that you're describing, I mean, you talked about conversational AI, but even if we talked about other use cases within a large enterprise, each of those things could be small models or multiple models of their own, rather than thinking about it as like one giant model that will solve all our problems.
I see. So what does Snorkel do exactly? And I know we're coming up on time here, but I know that Snorkel plays some role in this whole, enterprise adoption of AI game, but I'm not totally clear what it is exactly. Looks really cool.
That went by really fast, but I'll give you real quick details on Snorkel. So Snorkel started as a research project in Stanford, and the thesis behind Snorkel's project was that at the end of the day, the models that are being built are going to get more complex, and they're going to need more data to be turned into accurate applications. And the best way to turn these models into more accurate applications is through the interface of labeling, right? You take your knowledge or information, and then you tag it based on what are the different things that we are seeing in the world. A dog is a dog, and a cat is a cat, and this conversation is a good conversation. This conversation was a poor conversation. So you do these things, and for the most part, they were done in a manual fashion. Someone like yourself, who's an expert at conversations, would go and say, yes, that was a good conversation, or no, that was a poor conversation, right? And that is a very cumbersome and expensive endeavor for any enterprise. I mean, you think about building many applications, that adds up really quickly.
Yeah.
So what Snorkel focused on is how do we take this interface of data, training data as we call it, one, make it programmatic, and two, make it easy for people who have the knowledge to transfer that knowledge into data that can be used to train machine learning models. So it started with a collaboration with Stanford Medicine, where we worked with doctors, and we sat with doctors and tried to understand that if they were looking at some patient notes, if they were looking at some X-ray images, how would they describe anomalies, or how would they describe unique characteristics? We started encoding those into ways in which those could be turned into training data, and thereby started training more accurate models. Where we are now, which is 8 years into our journey from that initial research project, is we work with some of the largest companies in the world. So we work with 5 of the top 10 US banks. We work with Memorial Sloan Kettering. We work with Schlumberger and many other types of industries as well, and several government agencies, and do a few things. One, we help them take a lot of their unstructured and semi-structured data and then turn it into data that is ready for AI use through this concept that we call programmatic labeling. We are now starting to work with a lot of foundation model companies and companies that want to use foundation models or ChatGPT or GPT, and adapting them so that these technologies can be put into an enterprise use, things that I described to you before.
Yeah.
And then the third is we are producing, or we are creating this new workflow where the main focus of your team is to curate your data and analyze your results. Because for the longest amount of time, a lot of energy and effort has been spent on the model itself. And like we've talked in, earlier too, that the models are becoming more sophisticated. It's going to be harder to tweak and change the model on the fly, but it's going to be easier to edit the model's behavior by having the right input and monitoring the right outputs. So that's what we call as data-centric AI. And that's the part that we are very passionate about. We have a conference coming up in summer, where this is our 3rd year hosting this conference, and we want to see if folks on your show would want to join us there.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah.
It's an invite to the conference.
It's an invite to the conference. It's a virtual conference, and it's planned for June 6th, 7th, and 8th. And like I said, it's our 3rd year. For the last couple of years, we've hosted this conference, and it's progressively grown. So from 2021 to 2022, our attendance grew 5x, and we're hoping that we have similar growth growing into this year too, as these technologies just become more and more relevant.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you for the invite. And for the audience, we're going to include that in the show notes, a link to that conference. What's it called?
Yeah, it's called The Future of Data-Centric AI. And if you want to find out more, just it's future.snorkel.ai, and I'll send you the link to Chris so you can include it.
Awesome. That sounds great, man. Well, hey, time has really flown here. I want to be sensitive to your time. I know that you've got probably a bunch of stuff to do. If you are listening and you're liking this, check out the show notes for the Future of Data-Centric AI conference coming up June 6th through the 8th. I'll definitely be there. Devang, if you could just let folks know, like the URL again. Oh, you said future.snorkel.ai.
Correct.
And how can folks find you if they want to learn more about you or have a conversation with you?
Yeah, very easy. It's Devang Sachdev at Gmail, which is my email, or Devang Sachdev that's my handle on Twitter. Also Devang Sachdev on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the easiest for me, but all of these 3 things work. And I'll spell it out as DEVANG SACHDEV, and that should be good enough for you to find me.
Perfect, Devang. Well, hey, thank you very much, man. You enjoy the rest of your Friday, and let's have you back on here soon.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much, Chris.
All right, thank you. That's a wrap.
All right.
Boom. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at performancemarketinginsiders.com. This podcast is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the performance agency that makes you smarter, offering AI-driven search, paid social, analytics, and conversion rate optimization for financial services, health, B2B, and SaaS brands that know. Hey guys, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, you can get a performance marketing assessment for free. And this isn't some cookie cutter automated report. It lays out detailed, specific things you can do right now to unlock limitless growth and nirvana level personal satisfaction. To claim your free assessment, just go to performancemarketinginsiders.com/audit and you'll have your customer report within just a few days.